You felt it before, even if you couldn't quite name it in the moment. The energy shifts, the messages slow down, the warmth cools just enough to make you question yourself. One day she's leaning in, laughing, engaged, and the next, something feels off. She pulls back, and suddenly you're left standing there trying to decode silence. Now listen carefully, because this is where most men lose control, not of her, but of themselves. When a woman pulls away, the first 48 hours are everything. Not because she's playing games, but because this is the moment where your emotional discipline, your self-respect, and your understanding of human nature are put to the test. And most men fail that test without even realizing it. They chase, they over-explain, they panic, they try to fix something that hasn't even been clearly defined. And in doing so, they confirm the very doubts she's starting to feel. I'm going to speak to you directly, not as someone trying to soften the truth, but as someone who understands how women think, how attraction shifts, and what separates a man who commands respect from one who slowly loses it. This isn't about manipulation. It's about mastery of yourself. And before we go deeper, I want you to make one simple decision. Stay open-minded. Some of what you're about to hear might challenge your instincts. That's the point. Growth never feels comfortable at first. If you're serious about understanding women, about building real attraction instead of chasing validation, then subscribe, stay with me, and actually listen. Not just to respond, but to understand. Because once you learn how to handle these first 48 hours the right way, everything changes. 1. Do not chase what is pulling away. When a woman creates distance, your instinct as a man is often to close that gap immediately. You feel the silence and interpret it as a problem that needs fixing. So you reach out more. You send longer messages. You try to re-engage her with effort, logic, or reassurance. But what you don't realize is that this reaction doesn't create attraction. It exposes dependency. From a woman's perspective, attraction thrives on emotional stability and self-assuredness. When you chase her the moment she pulls back, it signals that your emotional state is tied directly to her behavior, and that's not attractive, it's pressure. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. When she pulls away, that is an outside event. The question is, can you remain grounded, or do you immediately surrender control of your emotions? Think about this honestly. When she goes quiet, are you reacting because you genuinely want to connect or because you're afraid of losing her? There's a difference. A man who is grounded doesn't chase distance. He observes it. He respects it. He gives space without turning it into a dramatic internal crisis. And ironically, that calmness is what often draws her back in. Imagine two men. One floods her phone with messages, trying to fix the situation. The other continues living his life, unbothered, centered, focused. Which one feels like a man she can respect? You already know the answer, so in those first 48 hours, your job is not to close the distance. Your job is to hold your frame, to stay in control of yourself, to resist the urge to chase what is clearly moving away. Because the moment you chase, you shift the dynamic, and not in your favor. 2. Silence is information, not rejection. This is where emotional intelligence separates men who grow from men who spiral. When a woman pulls away, many men interpret it as immediate rejection. Their mind fills in the gaps with worst-case scenarios. She's losing interest. She found someone else. I did something wrong. And suddenly, they're reacting not to reality, but to a story they created in their own head. But silence is not always rejection. Sometimes it's reflection. Sometimes it's her recalibrating her emotions. Sometimes it's her testing the space to see how you respond. Seneca spoke often about how we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And this applies directly here. The moment you assume the worst without clear evidence, you start behaving from a place of fear rather than strength. Let me ask you something that most men avoid asking themselves. Why does her temporary distance feel like a threat to your identity? Because that's what's really happening underneath. If her pulling away shakes you to your core, it's not about her. It's about how much of your sense of worth is tied to her attention. And that's dangerous territory. A woman can feel that energy, even if you never say it out loud. It shows up in your tone, your urgency, your need for reassurance, and it quietly erodes attraction. Instead of reacting emotionally, observe objectively. Has she clearly ended things, or has she simply taken a step back? Has she communicated disinterest, or has she just gone quiet? There's a difference between absence and rejection, but most men treat them the same. A grounded man doesn't rush to conclusions. He allows space for clarity to emerge. He understands that not every shift requires an immediate response. So when she goes silent, don't fill the void with anxiety. Let it exist. Let it reveal what it needs to reveal. Because sometimes, the way you handle silence says more about your strength than anything you could ever say to her. 3. Do not seek clarity too soon. One of the biggest mistakes men make in those first 48 hours is rushing to define what hasn't fully unfolded yet. You feel the shift, and instead of allowing it to breathe, you try to corner it into a conversation. You ask questions like, "What's going on?" Or "Did I do something wrong?" Or "Where do we stand?" And while those questions might seem reasonable on the surface, the timing behind them reveals something much deeper: impatience driven by insecurity. From a woman's perspective, being pushed for clarity too early can feel suffocating. It signals that you are uncomfortable with uncertainty, that you need immediate answers to regulate your emotions. And that pressure, even when it's subtle, creates resistance. Epictetus taught that we should not demand that events happen as we wish, but rather wish for them to happen as they do. In other words, you don't force clarity, you allow it to reveal itself. Because real clarity, the kind that actually means something, cannot be extracted under pressure. It shows up naturally over time through consistent behavior. Let me ask you something that might make you pause. Are you seeking clarity because you genuinely want understanding, or because you want relief from your own anxiety? There's a difference, and women can feel it. When a man is grounded, he doesn't rush conversations just to soothe himself. He observes patterns. He watches actions. He gives the situation enough space to either correct itself or expose its truth. And in doing so, he maintains his composure and his dignity. Think about it this way. If she's pulling away, she's already experiencing some level of emotional distance. The last thing she needs is to feel interrogated or cornered. That doesn't bring her closer. It pushes her further away. So instead of chasing answers, let time do its work. Let her actions speak. Let her energy either return or fade on its own. Because forced clarity is rarely honest clarity. It's just a temporary response to pressure. And a man who understands that doesn't rush. He waits, not passively, but with quiet confidence. 4. Maintain your rhythm. When a woman pulls away, many men unconsciously pause their own lives. Their focus shifts entirely onto her. They check their phone more often. They replay conversations. They lose presence in their work, their goals, their routines. Without realizing it, they hand over control of their internal state. But here's the truth. The moment you disrupt your own rhythm because of someone else's behavior, you weaken your position, not just with her, but within yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the importance of staying aligned with your own nature, regardless of external disturbances. Your rhythm, your purpose, your routine, your discipline is part of that nature. And when you abandon it, even temporarily, you create imbalance. A woman is deeply attuned to consistency, not just in how you treat her, but in how you carry yourself. When she senses that your entire emotional state shifts based on her attention, it subtly lowers her perception of your stability. Let me challenge you with something real. If she disappeared for a week, would your life still move forward, or would it feel like everything is on hold? Because that answer says everything. A grounded man doesn't pause his life when someone pulls away. He continues. He trains. He works. He builds. He connects with others. Not as a tactic to make her jealous, but because his life has structure beyond her presence. And ironically, that continuity is attractive. It communicates that you are not dependent on her validation to function, that you value your time, that you are anchored in something deeper than temporary emotional shifts. So in those first 48 hours, Don't sit in limbo waiting for her next move. Stay in motion. Stay aligned with your priorities. Keep your energy directed toward growth, not speculation. Because when you maintain your rhythm, you don't just preserve attraction, you strengthen your identity. 5. Do not reward inconsistency. This is where a lot of men unknowingly sabotage their own standards. A woman pulls away, goes quiet, becomes distant, and then suddenly reappears with a message, a bit of attention, or a casual check-in. And instead of staying grounded, many men immediately overinvest again. They respond faster, with more enthusiasm, with more availability than before, as if they've been waiting the entire time. What does that communicate? It tells her that she can withdraw and return without any shift in how you show up, that her inconsistency carries no consequence, and over time, that dynamic erodes respect. Seneca emphasized the importance of self-respect as the foundation of how others treat you. If you accept inconsistent behavior without adjusting your own energy, you teach people how to engage with you, and not in a way that benefits you. Let me ask you something honestly. Are you responding to her based on how she treats you, or based on how much you want her? Because those are two very different things. A man with standards doesn't punish or play games, but he does adjust. If she becomes inconsistent, he matches that energy, not out of spite, but out of alignment. He doesn't overextend himself for someone who is not meeting him at the same level. This doesn't mean being cold or dismissive. It means being measured. If she reaches out casually after pulling away, you respond calmly, without overcompensating. You don't reward distance with increased effort. And here's the key part. This isn't about controlling her behavior. It's about protecting your own value. Because when you reward inconsistency, you reinforce it. But when you maintain standards, you create a dynamic where consistency becomes necessary for access to your time and attention. And that shift changes everything. 6. Let her wonder, not reassure. This is where emotional restraint becomes powerful. When a woman pulls away, there's often a moment where she's watching, consciously or unconsciously, to see how you respond. And many men, without realizing it, remove all mystery from that moment. They reassure her too quickly. They make their feelings overly obvious. They eliminate any space for curiosity. But attraction doesn't grow in certainty alone. It also grows in curiosity. Epictetus spoke about the importance of restraint, of not saying everything that comes to mind, of not acting on every impulse. And this applies directly here. Just because you feel the urge to reassure her doesn't mean you should act on it immediately. Let me ask you something that requires honesty. When you feel like reassuring her, are you doing it for her comfort or for your own need to feel secure? Because often it's the second one. When you over-reassure, you remove the natural tension that creates intrigue. You make everything predictable, and while that might feel safe, it doesn't necessarily feel exciting or compelling. A grounded man allows space for uncertainty, not in a manipulative way, but in a natural, composed way. He doesn't rush to define everything. He doesn't flood her with affirmations just because there's a moment of distance. Instead, he remains steady, present, but not overexposed, engaged, but not overwhelming. And that balance creates something powerful. It allows her to think about you, to wonder where you stand, to feel your absence the same way you felt hers. Because when you constantly reassure, she doesn't have to invest emotionally. But when there's space, when there's a slight edge of uncertainty, she leans in to understand it. So don't rush to fill every gap with words. Let some silence exist. Let her feel your presence without you over-explaining it. Because sometimes, what you don't say carries more weight than anything you could. 7. Respect her space without disappearing from yourself. There's a subtle but critical difference that most men miss. When a woman pulls away, you're told to give her space, and that advice is correct, but it's often misunderstood. Giving her space does not mean shrinking yourself, abandoning your presence, or quietly hoping she comes back while you fade into the background. It means allowing distance without losing your sense of self. A lot of men confuse space with absence. They think the solution is to vanish completely, to stop engaging, to pull all the way back in a way that feels unnatural. But that creates a different problem. It turns what could have been calm confidence into silent resentment or passive withdrawal, and women can feel that shift. Marcus Aurelius wrote about standing firm like a rock against which the waves crash, remaining unmoved by external forces. That doesn't mean disappearing. It means remaining steady. Let me ask you something that requires honesty. When you give space, are you doing it from a place of strength, or are you secretly hoping it will make her chase you? Because intention matters more than the action itself. A grounded man respects her need for distance without turning it into a strategy. He doesn't hover, but he also doesn't erase himself. If there's a natural moment to respond, he responds calmly. If there's silence, he allows it without forcing interaction. He stays emotionally available to himself, not dependent on her behavior. Think of it like this. You're not stepping back to manipulate the situation. You're stepping back because you understand that forcing closeness when someone is pulling away only creates resistance. And at the same time, you remain rooted in your own life. You're still moving forward, still engaging with your purpose, still living with intention. That balance is powerful because it communicates something without words. You respect her space, but you also respect yourself. And that combination is rare. 8. Detach from the outcome. This is the point where everything either solidifies or falls apart, not externally, but internally. When a woman pulls away, most men become attached to a specific outcome. They want her to come back, to re-engage, to validate the connection, and that attachment creates pressure on themselves and on the situation. Every moment of silence becomes heavy. Every interaction becomes loaded with expectation. But here's the truth most men avoid. The more attached you are to a specific outcome, the less control you actually have over yourself. Epictetus made it clear that suffering comes from trying to control what is not within your control. Her feelings, her timing, her decisions. None of that belongs to you. The only thing you truly control is how you show up. So let me ask you something directly. If she never comes back, who are you? Not who you are with her. Not who you are when things feel good, but who are you without her validation? Because that answer determines everything. A man who is anchored in himself doesn't crumble when someone pulls away. He might feel it, yes. He might reflect, learn, adjust, but he doesn't lose his sense of direction. He doesn't tie his worth to whether or not she returns. Detachment doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're not dependent, and that distinction changes how you move. You stop overanalyzing every detail. You stop waiting for signs. You stop reacting impulsively. Instead, you become steady, present, grounded. Ironically, that energy is what often brings people back, not because you're trying to make it happen, but because you're no longer chasing it. And even if she doesn't return, you remain intact. That's power. 9. Let her actions define your next move. At the end of those 48 hours, you don't need guesses. You don't need assumptions. You need evidence. And that evidence comes from her behavior, not your imagination. Too many men make decisions based on what they hope is happening instead of what is actually happening. They create narratives, justify mixed signals, and hold on to potential instead of reality. And in doing so, they stay stuck in situations that don't serve them. Seneca warned against wasting time on illusions. He understood that clarity comes from observing what is real, not what is wished for. So here's the question you need to face honestly. Is she showing up, or are you holding on to who she used to be? Because those are not the same thing. If after those 48 hours, she reaches out with genuine interest, consistency, and effort, then you can meet her there, not with overexcitement, but with grounded engagement. You allow things to rebuild naturally, without ignoring what just happened. But if she remains distant, inconsistent, or unclear, then that is your answer too. And this is where self-respect becomes non-negotiable. A grounded man doesn't chase clarity forever. He doesn't wait indefinitely for someone to decide if they value him. He recognizes when to step back, not out of anger, but out of alignment with his standards. This is where many men struggle, because walking away requires strength. It requires letting go of potential, of emotional investment, of what you hoped could be. But staying in a dynamic where you are not valued requires something else entirely, the abandonment of self-respect. And that cost is far greater. So you don't force outcomes. You respond to reality. You let her actions guide your decisions, not your fears. Because at the end of the day, the way someone shows up for you tells you everything you need to know if you're willing to see it. The moment you understand this, you stop chasing clarity and start living in it. The truth about those first 48 hours is simple, but not easy. It's not about saying the perfect thing or making the right move to bring her back. It's about how you carry yourself when things are uncertain. It's about your ability to remain grounded when your instincts are pushing you to react. It's about whether you lead with self-respect or with fear. And that choice defines not just this situation, but every relationship you will ever have. The standard you set in moments like this becomes the standard you live by. If you take anything from this, let it be this. When a woman pulls away, the real test is not whether you can get her back. It's whether you can stay in control of yourself. Because the man who chases loses leverage, but the man who stands grounded gains something far more important than temporary validation. He gains respect, both from her and from himself. So hold your frame, observe, don't react. Let actions speak louder than assumptions. And never trade your self-respect for short-term reassurance. If this shifted your perspective, subscribe and stay with me. There's more to learn, and the more you understand these dynamics, the less you'll find yourself confused by them. I'll see you in the next one.